Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Enterprise Universe channel with Dr. James Stalker. Welcome, Dr. Stalker. Thanks a lot for meeting with us again today. The Enterprise Universe is dedicated to spreading goodness through innovation, and we've been talking about the fundamentals of entrepreneurship at the Enterprise Universe. So, Dr. Stalker, we've covered 7 of the core fundamentals in the last several weeks. What would be the next fundamental that you think we should tackle today?
Thank you, Eamonn. I appreciate that. So we're going to talk about the 8th fundamental today, learning. Okay. And it's really ties back to some of the things that we have talked over the last couple of times. So I want to just touch on those things and then how it ties back to learning. So, essentially, Eamonn, we have been building up the vocabulary, the words for Enterprise Universe to interact with itself and outside. So that's what I have done so far. But you pointed out several times the words that I have used, somehow they're inadequate, because what we're trying to do is really not same as what you could describe with a word that exists already, right? So kindness, for example, or purpose, and so forth. So what we have tried to do, what I have tried to do is pick the closest word possible to describe what we're doing. So in kindness, we had to spend a little bit more time on how that works. And the definition I came up with is essentially not a dictionary definition for kindness, obviously, but I take the core intrinsic idea behind that word and then try to merge with what I'm trying to do. So that's essentially what we have done. But one thing that I want to say about the spectrum, Eamonn, I think this is a good thing to think about. On the human behavior spectrum, selfish people fall at the far end of the spectrum, and selfless people, there are a few, they fall on the very right end of the spectrum. So where do entrepreneurs fall? They fall in the middle of that spectrum, where what I call, based on our discussion so far, it's mutual selfishness. In other words, as an entrepreneur, you still are trying to get something back, even though I discourage people to focus on that, but that still is the case while we're doing it. So on that spectrum, if you ask me, what are my suggestions for people to use? So I would have to say, I may have to disappoint you, Eamonn, on the far left end of the spectrum. I don't really have any good suggestions for people that are selfish, because I have not really done that. I've never really gotten in myself.
I've got to close the door, but I'm out. I'm only kidding.
So that's.
Sorry, apologies. Yep.
So on the far left end of the spectrum, I do not have great suggestions for selfish people, other than to say, why don't you open up your mind and go toward the center of that spectrum, or even go to the far right of the spectrum? So that's one suggestion I would give you. But our focus has been on the entrepreneurs that fall in the middle of that spectrum, where I call mutual selfishness, right? So there I have a suggestion, and that is, instead of giving your products to them, engage in a discovery process and try to understand their needs before you put your products and solutions together for them. That's really what the main point about being an entrepreneur using these 9 fundamentals. Okay, but I go a step further. For me, I suggest, well, whatever works for you and for your customers, so long as you are not forgetting the overriding goal of making your customers' lives better. Whatever approach works for you, you could engage in that. But as a leader or leading leader, I would like to use kindness even in the middle of the spectrum. So that's something that I wanted to distinguish from myself and others. But as I also pointed out the other day, without being kind, there's nearly impossible for anyone to become a true leader. And that's because your goal is to develop them and understand their needs without bringing your baggage. In fact, you came up with an analogy where a doctor dealing with a patient with his own illnesses or her own illnesses, it's really not the way to treat it, but that's one good example to highlight what I'm trying to say. So in that, dealing with people you may not have a good handle on, but because you force yourself as an entrepreneur to deal with customers, you have a set of behaviors that you already have acquired as a business person. And I'm saying it's much easier when you learn that, force yourself to apply to other people. So that's really the take back for you as the entrepreneur, because you already force yourself to behave better and use your best behavior toward your customers, and take that away from your experience and use that toward people in general. So as a community, or your family members and friends and so forth. So that's really what we have covered so far. And the distinction between customers and people is, as an entrepreneur, obviously you're dealing with customers, but you're also dealing with other people that come across many sections of the population, even globally in this day and age. So that type of behavior that you force yourself to obtain, you could be using that toward other people. So that's really kind of like the summary of that. And then I will jump into learning. And learning is something that we talked about many, many times, not as a particular fundamental so far, but here is what some of the things that you talked about over the last few sessions. The leading environment, as I presented, we'll be talking about that a lot in the next few sessions, but you think it's probably not practical, or it's not easy to implement. And the timelines might not work. And you are right about that. But when we develop these individuals within the enterprise universe, or enable them actually to engage in this type of environment, what distinguishes that environment compared to somebody else, Eamonn, is learning. Learning is really the key to unfogging yourself, or minimizing that delta that we talked about, or climbing up the mountain. So how do you do that is by learning, right? Learning is the key. The more understanding you have, the less confusion you have too in any particular subject matter. So that's really how the learning helps you unfog yourself. But it has to be thought out by some people. There's a lot of trash stuff out there that you may get exposed to, even though you consider they're learning. That's really not the case. You have to really kind of follow certain people that actually guide you through that process. So we, as the organization, the enterprise universe, will try to create the environment in which there are learning tools and the interaction with other people that are also on a similar path toward reaching that pinnacle that they're trying to do, and not to forget about engaging with our customers and learning some behaviors from them as you force yourself professionally to get better yourself. So that's really kind of like what the learning is about within the organization. But going over lots of issues that you raised as not practical, or maybe not possible, or maybe concerns, but the answer lies in what kind of effective learning environment that we create. So from which you have the tools and others to guide you and inspire you, and you create the desire in you to grow. So that's really what we're talking about today.
Well, that's a lot. One of the preconditions perhaps for learning is the idea that we're not playing games and trying to impress and stuff, and trying to put our 2 cents in all the time. I think that might be a precondition for learning, is being open to like one of the things you said in an earlier thing is that 99% of knowledge is unknown, and we keep on focusing on the known, and that there's so many fantastic problems to be solved if we can bring our thinking to it. It just seems to me that coming into learning, making sure we're empty when we come into learning isn't always easy, because we're so hooked on competition and making people think we know things, which kind of gets in the way of us actually just learning, if that makes any sense. This whole game theory thing of, if I look bad at a meeting, that's going to be a point down for me and a point up on my enemy across the board who's trying to get my promotion. That kind of mentality probably isn't going to lead to a learning environment, I would think.
It is from the current environment that you're talking about, where the rules are different, maybe not even rules. They are essentially people that make them up as they go along.
And survival skills.
And then survival too, like you talked about. And you brought up a good example where somebody was honestly pointing something out only to get fired later on. Yeah. And that amazingly happens all the time, but not within the enterprise universe, because the rules of the game are quite different. So I will tell you this too, Eamonn, and that's one of the challenges for me as the leader of the organization, to make sure these rules are pretty well understood by everyone. So I don't want anyone to take advantage of somebody else.
Well, the biggest challenge you have is that people have two sides to them. They show the boss one side and they show their employees another. And that dichotomy, I think there's two interesting things you've said, a couple of things, just preconditions is, number one is, how far are you away from being in reality? Probably, like, the more you can be in reality, the more you're able to participate in a learning environment, because you're not out there, if you will. I think the other thing is, you're not playing games, so you're not competing with the other people for some kind of advantage. I think that's another kind of an idea that you kind of brought out. And these are very important. I'm just saying the learning is, all of these other foundational things have to be there. Otherwise, the learning's not going to happen, because it'll just be another winner takes all competition between the participants, unfortunately, especially if the boss is watching, because they're all looking to, so often the boss is not, there's competition for airtime with the boss, there's competition for the bosses, and therefore if the boss isn't super mature, he's going to gravitate to people that agree with him and basically just are guessing him, and who don't tell him what he needs to hear. They tell him what he wants to hear. So I think a lot of it comes from the leadership, to be honest.
It is true, Eamonn. So one of the things that I would do is not fall for that trap. Okay, right. So essentially what I would do is, actually, I need to be criticized. Remember that. When I say criticism is something that we long for, I will be one of them. I'm not going to say, hey, you could never criticize me, I'm this and that. No, I would never say that. In fact, I would force them to see the other side of it, their side of it, and try to get them to talk to me about it and be open about it. So as far as impressing somebody like your superior, and how you want to gain an edge and all of that, I would sense it so quickly, and I would just try to say, no, that's really not the rewarding thing here. And one other thing too, Eamonn, within the enterprise universe, I want to develop them as leaders themselves. So one of the true manifestations of leadership is how you're mentoring others, right? So the rewarding thing is not to impress me as the CEO of the enterprise universe, but you will be impressing me as you're mentoring others. Right. So that's really what's going to be rewarded, and how you're, telling me things that I want to hear. I would never pay attention to that. Of course, if it's a criticism, I will, because that is really what's going to make me grow as a person. So I will be looking to that. But a person who really wants to get ahead, I'm not saying I'm going to quell competition completely. There's no such thing. Human beings have that tendency. And if you have 5 kids, of parents, they got the same startup, same money and everything else, they become 5 different people. That's really the nature of human beings. Some are competitive, some are passive, some are leaders, some are not, and all of that. So that happens within the enterprise universe too. The individualism is not something that I would never stop within the enterprise universe. So their path to that pinnacle, each their own. There are folks out there that are going along with them, but they still have their own unique path to that top. But I'll be rewarding them for things that they do to others to help them and so forth, unlike in other organizations.
So one question, just getting back to learning, you've spent pretty much your life learning, and it's, I guess, like, how did you, like, can you talk a little bit about, what constitutes, like, I guess here's a question for you. So for instance, the difference between real thinking and simulated thinking, where it's just, I'm just really not thinking deeply about something. I'm maybe applying a memorized rule, but I don't really have any foundational understanding of the topic. I just, A plus B equals C. I'm not sure really why A plus B equals C, but that's the way it is, and I can apply that. So is there, like, what do we mean by learning here? Is there a distinction between some more deeper sense of learning versus some shallower sense of learning? Is there, and what's been your experience of that?
Okay, so before I talk about that, I wanted to bring up one more point, Eamon. Mm-hmm. Remember the fifth fundamental, know thyself.
Yeah.
That's learning too, but that's learning about yourself. So this learning fundamental that we're talking about is for the organization, not for an individual. So an organization working together and learning together and teaching one another and mentoring one another. So if you wanted to ask me about some of the mechanics of how to learn, engage in learning, I could touch on that for individuals, but I will just use one word, Eamon. Learning starts with question. Question is the answer, actually, to learn. So if you are not able to question, it's pretty hard for you to really learn anything, and that's why I emphasize that questioning ability.
Do you really then, are you using learning in the context of collaborative learning, or there's this word that's going around, sense making sense of something, we're really talking about community learning, or multiple people learning together. Is that correct?
It is correct for the organization. So remember this. When an organization is learning without the purpose, they will take on a lot of different pathways. Mm-hmm. And that's really where people go off the rails. And that's why I was telling you, mm-hmm. if there is an organization that has a deficit, leadership deficit within them, and they all do, it's because they've taken down a path that's really not the path to go. And they have to unlearn all of that to get to step one, to follow this path to pinnacle that we're talking about. So you are right about, let's call it shared learning in a way, because, Eamon knows something about, like human relations, or you may know about physics, or you may know about math. Those are some of the things you are going to be sharing with your fellow entrepreneurs, essentially. As I said, everyone within the enterprise universe, I will treat them as entrepreneurs, maybe at a different stage in their development, but they still are starting at some point. So to answer your question, yes, it's collaborative learning and sharing, and not to forget mentoring.
And I am getting very much more to the conclusion that as complexity is increasing, we need more collective learning, because it's harder for us as individuals to make sense of things. I know exactly for myself that, just having dialogue with you is helping me, with my making sense of the world, by building these foundational concepts, and then we can build on those to have more intelligent conversations hopefully as we go along, based on these building blocks. But I do feel that we are at a point where collective intelligence is kind of what you're getting at in a way. Is that correct? We're trying to build a collective intelligence
It is for the organization. So the
Yes.
organization, remember, the recipe.
Yeah.
Recipe has three different groups of individuals, and
Yeah.
they have different backgrounds: technical background, business development background, and finance backgrounds. So they look at things from a different vantage point. That's always there, which is a good thing, because in that diverse viewpoints, they're also bringing some things to the table where they're
So,
able to share with others.
so just trying to bring this back to something that you've done all your life is that, do you feel that building models of things is like, if we've got this collective learning concept within the organization, and we build essentially we build models of things, and we get understanding through building those models, and then we can apply those models to the real world. Is that what we mean by learning, or is that something more? Is that innovation? Or like, I know I'm getting a little bit confused here, but I'm just wondering if modeling, the idea of getting consensus around how the world works, is learning. You know what I'm saying? In at least in this getting that consensus and building that model of reality, that consensus, that communal model of reality. Is that, am I getting off base with
Well,
that line of thinking?
you're right on, but it has to be tied to the purpose. So that's something that we have to do. Remember, the enterprise universe has uh, spreading goodness through innovation as the purpose. So the goals of that organization are quite different than somebody else's, right? If it's a religious organization, they have different purpose and they have different recipe of people. And their learning and sharing experiences are going to be different too. So to answer your question in a simple manner, it's all of the above. It's not only related to your product, not only related to your service, but it's also related to how well you are gelling with the leading environment. So something that we haven't really talked about a lot, Eamon, what that really means. But in the leading environment, everyone within the organization, from the CEO all the way down to the janitor, they're all on the same page. And it has to be made sure that is the case. So
But there
that's
has
really what I mean. And that's not going to happen overnight.
that,
There has got to be a lot of learning. So in
so
other
there has to
words,
be, yes, there has to be some assumption then that there is advantage to collective resonance, collective synchronicity, if you will, and then once those minds are resonating or are kind of in sync, then they can basically, I guess, embark on collective in learning and building. Does that make any sense? So I guess the thing is that it's you're if I'm understanding what you're saying, they got to get into sync, and then once they're in sync from the janitor all the way to the CEO, then they can engage in learning and in creation together based on that basic foundation. And that learning here is really got to do with, you know, collective intelligence and collective creation. Um,
it is
is
true.
that true? Or
It is true. It is true. So here is what the major learning uh, outcome of the enterprise universe is: you talk to a middle level manager or a janitor or the top level manager, they will all know what the enterprise universe stands for. The enterprise universe stands for spreading goodness through innovation. Every one of them would know that. They would have a clear idea about what that means and why we are pushing toward achieving that in whatever we do. It doesn't matter what position they're in. And I'll tell you this too, Eamon, and we will cover this a lot, but it looks like it's a good point to do. When we have gotten the janitor to think about the enterprise universe uh, purpose, and everyone within the organization is helping everyone else, the more people that help the janitor move up the ladder within the enterprise universe environment. Like, for example, he or she may lack education. He or she may be dealing with some hardships. We're going to make sure that organization is going to move them up the chain. And that's really what the learning environment is about. Because learning, in a way, for example, again, it points back to giving. Remember, when you are learning and it is excess, the surplus we talked about, you achieve that. And that's when you start becoming or moving from that selfish end of the spectrum that I talked about, right? So as you learn more about your excess and you need to give it to somebody else, you become less and less selfish. And that you only gain through learning. And when you are learning, the best way to learn, Eamon, is to teach. So you are trying to mentor others along that path. And as an organization, I mean, this idea, Eamon, you never really heard of, and I've never heard of, where all of the people are on the same page within the entire organization. In fact, our Army model is top-down model. Very few on the top, and everything goes from there down. And of course, you know, the ones at the bottom of it, they're still following orders and things like that. But that's not the kind of model that I'm building. The model that I'm building is not a pyramid model, but it's a horizontal pancake model. I want to make sure everyone is on the same page, no matter where they are, how much salary they're making. All of that is really not that important. I mean, it's important for them, but not to the organization as far as where they are and how they're contributing.
But it feels like the enterprise universe model is almost a way for us to think about our civilization too in this time of civilizational risk and crisis. You're almost saying, I think, that the enterprise universe would be a model for rethinking about how our civilization behaves. No more games, focus on the collective, know thyself, societal purpose, focus on people, you know what I'm saying? These are all kind of civilizational ideas, as well as just ideas around the enterprise universe. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that, and again, I don't want us to lose the focus of what this is all about. It's about the entrepreneurs, obviously, but it's tempting to say, Eamon, these fundamentals are going to apply to individuals in whatever walk of life they're in. It is true. And they could take some of the messages away from this and get better. I'm not saying there is utility.
And all I'm saying is that I suspect that one of the perhaps our society, our mechanisms are based on game theory. Our political system, our international system, our economic system, our hiring, it's all based on this idea that by like you brought up the other day about the fact that you don't want anybody between you and the customer, because that's warping the relationship between you and the customer. And it's about this, like, because there's an incentive for somebody to there's always now this incentive to put a spin on the ball and to distort either the information or distort the interaction. And it's like, I think what you're saying is we've got to get rid of those distortions in order to operate in this new modality, because those distortions are ultimately they're destructive both to the person and to the society, whether it's a company or anything else. At least, like, these are just ideas that have been, since we've been having these conversations, I've been thinking about it as fundamentally, why do we have problems? We're hiding information. We're purposefully spinning the ball all the time. There's always, and we have to clarify the connection between the customer and the entrepreneur. So it's needs based, not manipulation based.
It is true, Eamon, and you are right. And I wasn't discouraging the fact that this could be useful to the civilization and individuals. It is, but yeah. I want to really kind of focus on what we're trying to build. And I'll give you a solid example, this from my own experience. So if we have 5 salespeople, 5 of them, okay? And you know how salespeople are, they're competing. That guy makes a $2 million sale and I need to make $5 million sale. And I would, within the enterprise universe, I would say, hey, no, collectively, we're making $10 million sale together. You are sharing the burden and collectively increasing the sale for the enterprise universe, and you share that. The benefit, the enterprise universe benefits and everything else. I would not reward somebody to say, okay, he got $5 million, that's why he's rewarded. Because we know, Eamon, it's only a matter of time that's going to reverse. Somebody else is going to outdo that guy or gal in the next go around. That happens a lot. So we have to make sure they understand that they're doing it collectively. But this is the type of thing, competitively speaking.
Yes, and I think that gets back to the, I think there's a power thing there, though. If you have, like, again, it gets back to if people have power, they can demand more money. If they have no power, they can't demand money, which is like classic Marxist kind of thinking, that because you don't have the power, your surplus is taken by the capitalist. While if you do have power, you get to keep your surplus and you get to keep everybody else's as well. And, that idea of, is like, so how do you manage power relationships between people then? I guess the answer is because you've got these, but I'm just saying power dynamics between people, and it gets back to the playing the games again. And I don't know, it's just, I think, again, it's going to be, we're so wired for this behavior, man. It's like, I'm wired for it. It's like,
I will tell you that's a great point, actually, Eamon. So in the old game, the rules where it says it's a zero-sum game, right? If Eamon wins, I lose, because we're thinking there's only a finite amount of stuff. He gets set, I get nothing, or whatever. So that's a zero-sum game that we always played. But in this case, within the enterprise universe, we're not talking about that at all. I'll give you another example. And I actually talked about this on another show, and it's a great example. So you are a sports personality, and you win, or you try to win all the games, okay? So there is a loser out there right against you, and that's who you're winning. But I posed the question to a really great winning athlete, to say, hey, would you feel so great if your opponent was hurt? He was, maybe he had the flu, or he really was down. Would you feel the same way when you beat that person because he's down, right? The answer is no. Great athletes would say, I want the best opponent, and I want to beat them when they're at the best. Right. So here is what I would suggest to them. Well, then here is what you do, Mr. Athlete, winning athlete, make them better. Make them better and then win. You know what I mean? So show your moves or show your expertise to make them better. But you know what happens, Eamon, when you do that? You actually want to stop winning.
Right.
Because it's more rewarding to make them better than actually winning. So that's the evolution one has to go from the zero-sum game to what I'm talking about. Is it possible? Yes. All you have to do is taste that reward where you're helping others to get better, not to beat them as a winner you would, but just doing that in itself is so rewarding you don't even think about winning. So that's really the kind of model we're talking about within the enterprise universe.
And I catch myself in this conversation just being pulled back into my legacy thinking, my preconditioned, my program thinking, and it takes some work for me to pull myself out of win-lose mode or up-down mode and into we mode and into us mode and into together mode. I'm not saying that we have to, I feel we have to do it as civilization. I think it's a personal challenge. I think it's a company challenge. I think it's a global challenge. We're in it together. We're all on this rock planet rolling around the sun. We're all stuck together. So we better figure it out. But I think our system has wired us, and I think we've misinterpreted Darwinism, frankly, as an excuse for, Darwin didn't emphasize a competition. That was not part of, as I understand it, wasn't a central part of his theory. It was a part of the theory, but we have taken Darwinism and turned it into social Darwinism, and we've used that to justify all sorts of terrible things we do to each other, and that the market has taken social Darwinism to its natural conclusion as a rat race,
Eamon, as a fierce competitor in my early days of my career, so don't get me wrong, I evolved. I was competitive enough that even when I was topmost in my class, I wanted to make sure the second best was so far behind me. I don't know, for some reason, I thought that made me feel good. But after having evolved from that type of competitive thinking, I said, if I make them better, that's even better to win. But in the process of doing that, you actually think, hey, this is more rewarding, actually, not just winning. So you're right about that. And there are some things that we could do better. And, so one of the things, Eamon, the more I think about it, the more we discuss this, I talk about this as leading for organizational innovation, excellence. That's really what I call this program, leading program. But the more I think about this, Eamon, I think it could be applied to leading for world peace.
Nice.
Think about that application, because there are organizations, countries, and they are led by some people for each of those, and they have their own cultures, their own government structures, and all of that. We're not going to change any of that. When they come together, though, to do something for the common good of the planet, they kind of put aside all of their differences and then adopt this leading concept where they are separating themselves.
And my worry,
achieve the common good.
My worry is that we're not going to survive as a species unless we make this type of a turn, and that unless we make this psychological change from the I to the we, there is no future for anybody. The winners and the losers are going to go down the same drain.
That's true.
We're all go down the same drain. So, I really feel that what you're talking about here is an urgent call to transformation at a personal and a company and a societal level that is mandated by the situation we're in. I think we're in a pretty bad spot right now in terms of these games we've been playing, whether they're with sticks and stones or arrows and now nuclear weapons and AI and information warfare. And it's like we're getting to the end game here unless we start turning the corner. I guess
that's absolutely true, Eamon. But I know this too.
Yeah,
it's nearly impossible to teach anyone unless you do it yourself.
Yeah,
I
hear you. Like
a lot.
Me and all these other folks need to go through the fire of transformation. It's a personal journey. It's not we're not talking about somebody else here. We're talking about the guy in the mirror.
no, it's
the guy in the mirror has to go through the journey. So I'm not denying that. I'm just saying collectively we are up against it, and it's an urgent task for each of us as humans, not just the system, to because changing the system without changing the the human behavior underneath it, I don't see that's going to change anything really.
There is no way. It's a fallacy that you're going to change anything without changing the human behavior. But the best way to change a human behavior is by setting an example.
Yes, and doing it yourself. Absolutely.
Yeah, you have to do it yourself and let them see it. And that's one of the challenges for the enterprise universe. But I think we're up for it. We got the right temperament for it. And I have the right attitude. And
I think it's we need it. Let's put it that way. Like, we haven't even talked about all your innovations, but we certainly need without the philosophical foundation, the innovations are going nowhere. And I think that's almost like spreading goodness through innovation. I think to some extent we've already just been talking about what goodness is, in a sense. Yes. All of these things are just aspects of what goodness is. Yeah. And we haven't even gotten to the innovation bit yet. But without the goodness, you just got innovation going haywire, frankly.
Well, remember, Eamonn, I actually always think about the most important aspects of things, the intrinsic things that one needs to know. It's not about producing an innovation or a product or a service. That's so easy for me from my own experience. So I don't really pay attention to that. But the things that are not realized by people, but they are so important, and that take a lot of retraining and resetting, rewiring themselves. And that's why we're spending so much of our time on this, because it is so important. Once you have these, it's like, okay, so you are on a hiking trip. So preparing yourself with the water and the food and everything else, and make sure it's lighter too, so you don't really tire yourself. That prep is more important than the hike itself. The more you put effort into, the less hassle it would be.
Right.
And that's really what I want to point to. The prep work is so important, and that's what we're trying to do here.
Okay, brilliant. So anyways, Dr. Stalker, looks like we're at the end of our allotted time. We'll be back next on Thursday, I guess, with some more exciting discussions. Thanks again for all of the, and as I say, every time we have a conversation, never quite sure where we're going to end up. And I'm never quite sure I understand what the word means going in. So hopefully learning now means a little bit more to me in this context than I had before. And I look forward to any last words before we
yeah, Eamonn, this is always great, and your questions really highlight a lot of the points that I'm making here too. But I would say learning, but it's constant learning. So right. People should never think about, okay, I learned something yesterday, I'm done. No, that's not the way it is. It's constant learning no matter where you are, and I emphasize that. Now, I also think, Eamonn, constant learning leads to prosperity.
Right.
Okay. So, you're prosperous because of your constant learning, which is hard work. And then that leads to world peace. People do not have the basic needs and they're struggling for it. You cannot talk to them about world peace. It does not even make sense. So you have to give them prosperity first. But how do you get it? It's not like somebody write you a check. That's what the universal basic income is. That's fine, but you still are going to struggle as a human being, even after you have the basic needs, because once your needs are met as a human being, you're looking for the next best thing. So you always have to be able to learn. So constant learning to satisfy yourself and creating that prosperity, and that leads to world peace. That's really what the enterprise universe is going to do. And because I don't consider that hard work, even though it's hard work, it's going to be fun work for all of the people that are going to interact with us.
And I think that we could certainly spend another 45 minutes talking about what you just said in the last 2 minutes, because I think there's some more ideas there that need exploring or explaining. Just not because I just think there's a lot there in just what you said, Dr. Stalker, about the life that that in some fundamental sense fulfills a basic human need, and that it's a very powerfully a very powerful mode of meaning in our lives. And I think we tend to have an attitude of, oh shit, I got to learn something that's going to make my brain hurt. And you're saying, no, 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 no. Learning is a path to fulfillment. So I think there's more to discuss about that maybe at our on the next time we chat. What do you think?
I think we should do that. And competitors is another topic. It's really the ninth fundamental. We'll top it off next time. But you're right. This learning thing, Eamon, really, and I will tell you a lot about what learning really is, not reading somebody else's books, thinking about some things and developing the logic to do it. That's really more important. In fact, I spend more time in that than reading somebody else's book. And I've read a lot of books, but what I made a conclusion about is what they write about is really not up to the level where I would expect it to be. Most of the books are not. So I want to make sure.
And that's get back to that point I was trying to get at, which is there's different types of learning and they're not all equal. Reading a book versus moving out into the unknown country of the 99% unknown and getting outside and moving in there, that's where the real learning is, not here where we're not in the cozy, ignorance of pretend knowledge. I think we're so much more ignorant than we give ourselves credit for.
Well, Eamon,
so, it's like I think that it takes a lot of courage to be out there in the wilderness learning.
One of the challenges you might pose to me, Eamon, and this is a good chance for you, is am I able to bring people to that level? That's a great challenge, actually. But with the right inspiration and the tools and constant learning, of course, learning with them, I think it's doable. You bring me someone with the desire. I don't really care about too much about their talents, as I was saying before. I could create that within the enterprise universe, but you really need to have that inclination to want to get better. And I take that person any time than somebody with a PhD in some area. That's really not as important as somebody who has the desire to succeed or desire to get better. I will take them anytime.
Well, that sounds great. Well, let's hopefully we can chat about that a little bit more. But I think it's been a great conversation, Dr. Stalker, and thanks very much for giving us your time, as usual.
Greatly appreciate it, Eamon.
Thanks so much.
You.